Hi, and welcome to our conversation, Thinking Like an Ecosystem. What are ecosystemic mindset shifts and how can they benefit your organization? This conversation is for stewards of organizations, businesses, and communities looking for new ideas on leadership and organizational structure. And we'll discuss the benefits and methods of emerging forms of leadership, new business paradigms and mindsets that are going to equip us and our organizations to thrive. And we want this to be a conversation. So at the end of the chat, we'll have some links where you can connect with us. And I'm delighted to be joined in this exploration today by Lauren Minnis. Hi, Lauren. Could you tell us about you and your work, please?
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Minnis. I'm the Director of Regeneration Pollination, and I'm currently a Bioleadership Fellow. And I've been spending the past 16 years creating opportunities for people to come together and learn from each other and get inspired around how we can live more regeneratively on this planet. Regeneration Pollination creates networking events that cultivate, cross-pollinate, and celebrate the global regenerative movement so that local, bioregional, global, and sector change makers build solutions for our people, planet, and future. People who come and keep coming to our events will continue to grow a larger, more diverse community of relationships that will bring resources and solutions to their regenerative work. So Nick, why don't you share a little bit more about you and yourself and your work?
Thanks, Lauren. So my name is Nick Graham, and I've been building businesses for corporations like Nike for about 15 years. And then I really found my calling getting into community building, and I founded the Weaving Lab about 4 years, co-founded the Weaving Lab about 4 years ago. And the Weaving Lab is a community of system change practitioners learning together, leading transformation projects for a thriving world for all. Wow. Well, what does thriving mean? Well, I'll leave that as a question for you to think about. Weaving focuses on interdependent well-being of ourselves, of society, and of nature. And weaving is a collaborative leadership for systems change. And the Weaving Lab has around 300 members globally, leading projects, stewarding community and place together, and impacting around 300 million lives. I'm also the co-author of the Future Skills report that was commissioned last year by World Skills to uncover emerging trends and needs in skills, business skills, for the coming decade. The research project looked at foresight from around 700 experts from 45 countries and explored the implications for 7 industries that cover 90% of the global workforce. So before we get into that, Lauren, what are your observations and frustrations with the current ways of working, business as usual?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Well, it's a pretty exhaustive list, but I'll try to go through at least some of what I've written down for myself here. So let's see, to start, there's one thing in particular that I've been hearing in many of the different circles that I'm in, and that's how there's a lot of organizations and people that operate in silos. And that creates, I think, a little bit more fragmentation, and we're not really seeing how things are interconnected and the importance of reaching out beyond, comfort zone and barriers or boundaries to diversify and explore possibilities and opportunities. There's the focus on short-term goals. People bring a lot of ego to conversations and to their work. They focus on being right and blaming others for their faults and what's going wrong, not taking personal responsibility and not having integrity, not seeing how one, whether it's you or your organization, impacts others and cause ripple effects. So these are typical impacts that may go unseen. Kind of that, also there's like the take culture and, needing to continue to grow and take from people, take from land, and not seeing the repercussions for that. lack of engagement within like the local community of your company or beyond, having companies that aren't being adaptable, open, integrative, or even innovative, not evaluating or applying feedback, not empowering people, and finally, a lack of focus on well-being, because well-being is really important and goes unnoticed and isn't as valued. So that's some of my observations. What about you, Nick?
Well, that's a pretty exhaustive list. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that, fortunately. Just maybe think about this. What I'm struck by is this zero-sum winning mentality at the expense of others. So yeah, that's I guess it depends on the country and the situation, but yeah, zero-sum, win-win-win at all costs. And the other thing is, I mean, we're really sprinting towards so many crises. I mean, it's a great world to live in, but never before have we sprinted towards as many crises as fast as we are now. So I think that bigger picture accountability piece is critical for us. So why should leaders think about their organization in terms of community and an ecosystem?
Well, if we were to look at nature, we can see that there's many individual organisms and species, and no one species will live outside of itself in relation to other organisms or species and their environments. No one species is an island, and organisms and species are interdependent of one another, and they form a larger community depending on where they're located. And they're a part of larger ecosystems. And, these communities, they could be grouped by location, biome, bioregion, continent. And these places create a shared commonality. But communities, they don't exist by themselves. And the same thing goes for organizations. And similarly, if we look to nature again, as an example with our food crops, in modern agriculture, we tend to grow a lot of varieties of crops, but typically you'll see that there's one variety, and it'll be like one variety of corn, one crop of wheat or palm oil, for instance. And that's not necessarily how nature works. And what we find is that monocrops lead to stripping of nutrients from the soil due to pesticides, and that will also increase pests because they'll develop resistance. It'll also reduce the soil microbiology, and that'll also affect groundwater, and the list goes on. Also, if we look to a forest isn't made of one type of tree. It's full of diversity with different types of trees and shrubs and ground cover, mycorrhizal, birds, insects, and plants. And these interlinking communities are woven together and they benefit one another. So why should your organization be limited to just one way of thinking? And you can't ignore the diversity that's found in your organization. We see in nature, the more diverse an ecosystem is, the stronger and more resilient it is. So in terms of your organization, having diversity leads to innovation and also to resilience. Are you including diverse voices in your decision-making? Now, what do you think, Nick?
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, spot on. And I'm just thinking about the food system challenge that we're all in, and maybe not all super aware of how serious that is, the loss of biodiversity and the food that we eat, and the impact that has on all of us. Some other things to add to this. Let's see if we can get this slide working. Yeah, there we go. Well, there's a lot of great sessions in this summit around building community and restructuring organizations towards that. And we're totally aligned, 100%. But what goes beyond community, and that was a thought that was at the core of the Weaving Lab. So it's the relationship between these communities. And so, yeah, it's really, if we can think about this bigger picture, this awareness, the relationship between the constituents, the stakeholders in a system, whether that's your competitors or further down the supply chain, or maybe potential allies. So this big picture perspective this lack of awareness that we were talking about earlier can be hugely beneficial. And the first step to thinking systemically is to be able to see yourself in that system. Again, that's why I think the food system example is a great one, because we're all in that food system, but we might not always realize it. Yeah, and I just also wanted to mention again a huge thanks to Lana and the team for putting this together. Love this concept of community and businesses heading in that direction, because community is about aligning collaboration towards a shared purpose, which, if you're a business leader, that sounds pretty useful as a structure, right? But then again, we wanted to talk more about the ecosystemic side of things. And there can be many human or social ecosystems, whether it's the healthcare system or the water ecosystem, the education ecosystem. But one thing that's often missing from these human and social systems is the eco itself. So what voice does nature have? What role does nature have? So I would challenge everyone to think about that in terms of their organization. Some of the other benefits we wanted to talk about, well, the role of empowering people in your organization. So self-organizing, yeah, I mean, there's so many benefits there around cost and innovation and commitment to the vision of your organization, and allowing the emergence, allowing the full potential of the individual parts will benefit both the individual and the little teams and the greater whole. And the last idea I wanted to share here is actually about ideas. Lauren, you mentioned diversity, and so ideation being one of the key benefits of this bigger picture perspective. And I wanted to encourage you to look at Pixar as an example. Their culture is really founded on creativity and ideation, and is a great example as a case study. So what are some of the mindsets and paradigm shifts that are currently changing at this point in time?
Well, one shift that we're seeing is in relation to how we relate to each other and to the environment. And that is the shift from seeing ourselves as separate to being connected. So if we look to the environment, right, there isn't necessarily separation. You can actually see that things are connected or interconnected. To quote John Muir, when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it's attached to the rest of the world. So in regards to your company, think less about, having separate cubicles and how people have different jobs, which, by all means, these different jobs, their functions are extremely important. But instead, see how the things are actually connected and linked. So if you think in terms of community, you can create more cohesion, and you can also increase a sense of belonging. And people want to feel that they're belonging to something, especially something that has a shared mission or purpose. So see how the organization is connected to the wider community, that which it belongs to, both locally, thematically, and beyond. And secondly, there's also the importance of thinking more in terms of relational rather than transactional. So the place matters, the person matters, and communities and different processes that your organization is doing matter. And it's good to think about also the quality of the relationships and to shift away from outcome-based short-term thinking and to think more long-term and how people and processes are connected and even interconnected.
So from my side, yeah, linking to that, well, I think there's another way of describing this relational, from transactional to relational, is also from ranking mindset to linking. And what do we mean by this? So ranking would be, I need to be at the top of the exam results. I need to be at the top of the market share. I need to be number one at all costs. And you can even think about this in social situations. When you meet someone, there's often this kind of ranking that's going on. But what if we flip that into a much more connective linking? So what are the connections that could be explored? So another way of looking at this is the reframe from competition to collaboration. So there are so many examples where collaboration can be beneficial mutually for everyone. When we talk about win-win-win, it's win for 3 different parties rather than just this zero-sum game that we were talking about earlier. Another one to mention is this shift from siloed to systems thinking that we already talked about. So the helicopter view or the satellite view, and building bridges, that perspective allows you to see the relationships and to make connections in a different way. I wanted to take a moment to introduce some of the insights from the Future Skills report at this time. So this slide here, we have a lot of yellow tiles, and these are the skills that were identified as most critical in the various industries. So the yellow indicates that they're social skills. So collaboration and facilitation and co-creation being the #1 skills, the top skills rather, across all sectors. So you'll see the predominance of yellow on this slide. The orange is skills of self. So how do we learn? What are our biases and ethics? So the first column on the left-hand side is the aggregation of all of the industries. But to get into some of the paradigms that have been emerging, the synthesis of this insight of 700 plus leaders around the world. So first of all, you'll see the decline of the, let's say, extractive industrial paradigm, the horizon 1, the blue line. The digital line here is the light blue line. So obviously that's pervasive in all of our lives and is only going to be increasing, and digital intelligence and fitness and is going to be more and more fundamental, including cyber skills, cybersecurity, privacy at the core. Fortunately, we're seeing some green shoots starting to sprout up, the regenerative horizon, which will be more prevalent later in the decade. And then the paradigms that we identified, there were 6 paradigms. And some examples of these might be witnessed through the emergence of B Corps, the shift from single bottom line business focus, shareholder value, into triple bottom line, which is people and planet and profit together, so that businesses are able to steward their habitats as well as their people and their shareholders. But some of the to tap into some of these economic paradigms a bit deeper, related to community thinking, the experience-based paradigm. So this is shifting away from alienated consumerism towards much more participatory experiences and economic models. So this helps us bridge social and cultural divides and connecting us to ourselves and the environment, where the consumer can become the producer and the co-creator. And likewise, we've mentioned already a little bit about the emergence of complexity. So as we move away from our traditional kind of linear mindsets and systems, where we live in a complex networked world. I mean, COVID reminds us, sadly, of that, that everything is interconnected at a personal level, a social level, and a planetary level. Well-being is inextricably intertwined in everyday interactions. The last one that I wanted to mention as we shift maybe from community mindsets to more ecosystemic mindsets You could argue, obviously, that complexity is definitely ecosystemic, is the rise of relocalization. So again, COVID was accelerating this trend that was already happening, the shift away from globalized supply chains and economies of scale to more independent and resilient local production networks that serve local communities and bioregions, which is a great way to think about things. So this leverages cost advantages, and you can get much more responsive and speed to market and flexible with your production and sensing. Lauren, you probably have a lot more experience than I do in the relocalization piece. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think the one thing that I wanted to add about this too is it's a nice conversation to fit into thinking, rethinking about your business as a community, because the process of relocalization also increases the sense of place. And when you're thinking of your business as a community, communities tend to have a sense of place. So you're creating stronger ties in your business and to those communities and the places that your business is connected to.
Could argue there's nothing more important than connecting to your place as a steward and an experimenter. What about the regenerative paradigm? So this is the shift from the, let's say, the traditional make. So take, make, use, and lose. That's the traditional consumption extractive mindset. So we're starting to see shifts towards circular, zero waste, life-centered, long-term perspectives with abundance at the core as a mindset. Lauren, what's your take?
Well, yeah, so thinking more regeneratively, when we say regenerative, for some people who may not be as familiar with it, if you were to think about your organization as being one that's regenerative, your organization, you would be thinking it as in terms of it being a listed system, living system with not just with separate parts. You would be seeing all those parts working together as a whole. And similarly, like you were saying, the regenerative economy, regenerative systems aren't like extractive and destroying their surroundings. They're more focused on renewal and rebuilding. And regenerative is more life-giving. So you can think like, how can your organization give life both within itself and outside of itself? To quote Carol Sanford, regeneration is a process by which people, institutions, and materials evolve the capacity to fulfill their inherent potential in a world that is constantly changing around them. So in other words, regeneration is the means by which enlightened disruptive innovation happens.
Sounds pretty awesome. Yeah. So how can leaders flip their mindsets to these new paradigms?
Well, one way is to be thinking more in terms of being rather than doing. So we've wound up in having cultures and societies that value productivity, right? Produce, have a result. But what if you focused more on well-being of the individual and the collective whole that make up your organization? How each person is being, and even how your organization is being, right? It can totally impact and have ripple effects, both on the work of the people in the business and beyond. So it's good for you to be thinking about your organization's workplace culture. And sometimes it's also good to not be so over hyper focused on results and allow yourself to take note of what's happening both in your organization and around your organization, and being aware of the processes and the journey that your business is on.
Yeah, the magic is in the process. And that was something that I learned through my connections in the Weaving Lab. And as I was thinking about the power of community, that's really one of the most fundamental ways that we change our mindsets, is by rubbing shoulders with people that inspire us to behave a different way. So that would be the starting point that I would suggest, is to expand and find folks that are embodying this change that you're looking for, or inspiring you to take you to the next steps on your journey. So The Weaving Lab and Regeneration Pollination are great examples of this, but there are many more. Finding people that are leading this type of change and learn from them. Yeah, these learning journeys are transformative. The other idea that I wanted to share was this gifts to future selves. So one of the concepts that was introduced to me, I was fortunate to spend some time with some Indigenous elders, and the idea of making decisions based on 7 generations is just a real gift. So yeah, this respects the culture of the past, but also gives a voice to the future generations that are so often that just don't have a seat at the table, obviously. So this idea of future gifts can also be translated to your organization. What kind of gifts do you want to give your organization in 10 years' time? It can also translate to yourself. If you're thinking about personal habit change, what kind of gifts do you want to give to your future self? So yeah, long-term thinking. The other things to mention, yeah, decentralization. So empowering small groups, community-minded. Yeah, where do you start? Yeah, so if there are people that are community-minded in your organization, they don't have to be senior leaders, but you want to start where there is energy, where there is already some activity or some affinity towards this. And then it's just taking little steps with small groups and empowering them to make their own decisions. And yeah, experiment, see how it goes. Biomimicry. Well, this is a favorite word. It basically is nature is, we are nature. We're not separate from nature, but to be, to witness and learn from nature as nature. So biomimicry, some examples. So Velcro is a great one. In the Scottish Highlands, there are a lot of burrs that attach themselves to your clothes, and that's how they manage to spread. So that was the inspiration for Velcro. High-speed trains, when they go into a tunnel, that causes a challenge. And the inspiration to solve this was the beak of a kingfisher. And in technology, so machine learning, AI, and collective intelligence are inspired by swarm intelligence of bees, of ants. And then circular economy is inspired by symbiosis. Waste is a human invention. So in nature, one organism's waste is a feast for another. So in the municipality of Kalundborg in Denmark, they've been inspired by this this symbiosis, and they now call it industrial symbiosis, where every producer, their waste goes to another consumer that takes this and puts it to use. Lauren, anything else to add?
Yeah. So lastly, there's thinking like a watershed. So think about how information can flow rather than just being from top down. See how things are interconnected. And if you remember how I was sharing earlier a bunch of times about the ripple effects. So regarding the people in your organization, their voice matters, and how decisions that are made in one location that can impact other decisions and people, downstream. So watersheds, they can also be very big or small, depending on the location. And modern industry today, right, if we think about it, it interferes with the flow of water from the watershed, like in the development of dams. And if you were to think about certain industries, like a chemical plant, and then they just go ahead and feel that they could just dump all their waste into the water, and they're not really thinking about the effects that will have downstream, where the water is polluted and it'll affect downstream ecologies. I actually love really referring to the work of my teacher of mine, Brock Dolman, and looking at how we can rehydrate versus dehydrating our landscapes. So to quote from Brock and Kate Lundquist from their publication Basin Relations, watersheds literally underlie all human endeavors and form the foundation for all future human aspirations and survival. Watersheds topographically define community, and the health of your watershed depends on collaborative relations between neighbors in your shared basin. So if you think of your organization like a watershed, how healthy is your organization? How healthy are the neighboring communities? How can you rehydrate your organization? How can you bring more awareness of your basin of relations?
Fabulous. I love that. Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been a pleasure being on this journey with you. And in closing, we just wanted to wrap up with some links for everyone to connect. So there's the links to the research and our organizations. And there's also an event that we're hosting on December the 2nd, a cross-pollination event. For those of you that are interested in these types of concepts, these organizations and many others will be represented. So you're very welcome to join us there. And yeah, so thank you from me, and over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you everybody so much for listening to our talk. And we want to leave you with one question to consider. What awareness and benefit would thinking like an ecosystem bring to your organization?